when you're at the hospital, it seems as if they forget that HIV does not just affect your health. Unlike other illnesses, it sometimes only affects your health, but with HIV, it's more, I think it affects your life more than your health sometimes. Like, you know, it can even be the flip side where, you know, sometimes having a psychologist and not going to the hospital will fix your viral load more than, you know, going to all your appointments and being stressed out at home. Like,
if people hide it, that's where the self-stigma starts, because you thinking about what others are going to think of yourself.
Self-stigma, I think it really starts in yourself, like that whole pity stuff, that whole victimization, doing it on yourself, like you're still positive. Do you know what I mean? In the end, you're still positive. Like, you've really got to come to a point where you just accept who you are and what's happened.
When we talk about HIV, the word stigma comes up a lot, but let's take a moment to think about what that actually means. When a group of people is stigmatised, it means they're treated differently in a negative way. They can be marginalised and punished. Often this is a group that already is facing social exclusion. So there are different types of stigma. There's intended stigma and unintended stigma. With intended stigma, this is where someone has knowledge and information and they act upon it. So, for example, if there's a child who's HIV positive and their school finds out, intended stigma would be that school saying, we don't want you to come here anymore. So the school knows about HIV and they act upon it in a negative way, marginalising and isolating that child.
Well, stigma is a very small word, but it has massive implications for everybody living with HIV, but perhaps particularly for children and young people. So I think one of the ways in which professionals can respond to stigma is by raising it with children and young people, and raising it in the context of giving them some education, talking about what does stigma look like, talking about the groups of people who've been stigmatized in history: women, Jews, blacks, the disabled, the blind, the deaf, people with mental illnesses. Lots of people have been stigmatized, and even though you may not think or you may not feel that you've been stigmatized, HIV is one of those things which is considered in some communities, not necessarily all, to be stigmatized, and it may have an effect on you. And then you might lead you into a conversation about, well, what might those effects be? How might they be manifesting in your life? Does it manifest in not telling your friends? Does it manifest in a sense of shame? Does it manifest in a sense of you being not the same as other people and not acceptable? And many people with HIV would probably agree with those statements, but because they're quite subtle, because they're interwoven into lots of different stories that they have about themselves, they can be quite difficult to unpick.
With children and adolescents living with HIV, because at the start of the epidemic they were expected to not live, there's been a lot of protectionist practice which has developed. And some of this can be seen as creating unintended stigma. So this protectionism, if we look at the family, could be that within the family unit they feel the child shouldn't be told their HIV diagnosis. Or once they are told their HIV diagnosis, they don't want to talk about HIV with the child because it may upset the child. And therefore what they're doing is they're making a conscious decision to protect the child, but by doing that, what they're saying is that HIV is something that shouldn't be talked about. And if we look outside of the family and look at, say, healthcare provision or support service provision, unintended stigma can happen there, where people decide not to tell a child the name of HIV, or not allow the child to be involved in conversations about HIV.
We've tried to explain what stigma is to young people. We've explained how stigma works, and stigma works by othering. I, the uninfected, untainted person, is absolutely fine. It is you who carries this horrible, degrading mark of being unwanted. And that makes me feel good about myself, and it's designed to make you feel bad about yourself, and that's the way I preserve my feeling of being good. So that's what we explain to young people. And then we do exercises around the way in which that feeling emerges in their lives. And because this is complex, we look at the sort of very intricate tapestry of feelings and emotions and thoughts that young people have about themselves and about other people, and try and start to unpick some of those, some of the effects of self-stigma. We've also tried to help young people to imagine themselves in a year's time when they've perhaps thought more about the ways in which they've carried some of that stigma, and maybe in some ways in which they've let it go, and then they write a letter to themselves and congratulate themselves for having achieved something. But it might be, for example, sticking to my meds, because I am worth sticking to my meds. I am worth being alive. I am worth being healthy, because I'm a valuable, worthwhile person.
So unintended stigma comes from protectionism and protectionist practice. And self-stigma can have a huge impact on a child or adolescent. It impacts on the way they accept themselves. HIV is part of themselves. It doesn't define them, but it is part of them. And if they struggle to even say those 3 little letters, and they feel that HIV is a bad thing, it's something that's dirty and it's something that shouldn't be spoken about, then they will struggle to accept themselves. So it impacts on the individual's health, it impacts on the individual's happiness, and it can also impact on the individual's mental health. And finally, self-stigma impacts on the future. And if we don't see ourselves having a future, then it's very difficult to value ourselves now. And having future aspirations has been demonstrated with many adolescents as showing that they do better at school, they feel better about themselves, they build better relationships, and they make better decisions. But what we as practitioners do have is the ability to challenge and control unintended stigma, to look at our own practice and think about the way we talk about HIV, the way we engage with a child around HIV, the way we support a family around HIV.
Self-stigma refers to the feeling that you have taken in those very negative messages about what other people, what society says about who you are with the condition you have. And of course that affects how you deal with your relationships. If you're approaching your relationship, any relationship, a social or romantic, a sexual relationship, from the point of view of being a marked, dangerous, threatening person, then that's going to have probably a very negative effect on that relationship and exposes you to many very negative things. But because it's subtle, because it's hidden, because nobody is literally pointing a finger in your face saying you are a tainted, unwanted, valueless, worthless person, it can be very difficult for particularly young people to decode the messages that they get and to find ways of challenging those negative stereotypes, views, comments, and finding a way to maintain a healthy sense of their own worth, their own value, their own self-esteem. We've recently done a study here in East London, and we asked a group of young people about their experiences of stigma. Girls had more experiences of stigma than boys, and we were curious about this. Boys said they were much less stigmatized, and we concluded that boys consider they were less stigmatized only because fewer people knew about their status, because they didn't tell anybody. Of course, what the boys couldn't see was that not telling anybody is in fact coming from a stigmatized place, because you're already ashamed, you're already afraid of being rejected, you're already afraid that you carry the unwanted mark, the mark of worthlessness, the mark of valuelessness.
It's sort of, I think everyone experiences a sort of a battle within themselves, but I think that's just them coming to terms with what they have and trying to find a way to deal with it. And it took me quite some time, and I really struggled with mine, but I know, like, if you just see the bigger picture and try to always look on the positive side, that's when you sort of come to terms with it more.
Like, you have to really accept it. You've got to really change your whole mind frame about HIV before you even consider other people into your life.